when a waitress at a small-town Denny's restaurant received an unusual feeling about a man and little girl who walked in at 2 a.m. on July 2, 2005, she immediately knew something was wrong. The child looked familiar, and the man seemed nervous and out of place. Thinking quickly, she grabbed a newspaper with missing children photos and compared it to the girl sitting just a few tables away. What she discovered would end one of the most horrific crime sprees in American history. This story takes us to a quiet lakeside town in Idaho called Coeur d'Alene. It's the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where children play outside without fear, and where violent crime is almost unheard of. But on May 16, 2005, what should have been just another quiet Monday morning quickly became a day that would haunt the nation. It all started when police received a call to check on a family who hadn't been seen or heard from in days. When officers arrived at the house on Frontage Road, they found the front door unlocked. What they discovered inside would shock even the most experienced investigators. The scene was horrific. Inside the house, they found 3 bodies. 40-year-old Brenda Groene, her 13-year-old son Slade, and her boyfriend Mark Mackenzie had all been brutally murdered. Each victim had been tied up with zip ties and beaten to death with a hammer. The violence was so extreme that it was clear this wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong. But this crime scene was just the beginning of a nightmare that would only grow darker. 2 of Brenda's youngest children were missing: 9-year-old Dylan and 8-year-old Shasta. Their beds were empty, and there were no signs of them anywhere in the house. Authorities feared the worst and immediately issued an Amber Alert. Search teams scoured the dense woods and winding roads around the town.
My name is Don Robinson. I am a retired FBI supervisory special agent. Our role in this early stage of the case at the FBI was to find the children.
The FBI stepped in to help with the investigation, but Dylan and Shasta were nowhere to be found. For weeks, the search continued. Police followed every lead, interviewed every possible witness, and checked every tip that came in. The case made national news. Posters with the children's faces were everywhere. Their father, Steve Groene, made tearful pleas on television, begging for his children's safe return. "Please, if you have my children, just bring them home," he said during one press conference. "They're just babies. They don't deserve this." The community rallied around the family. Volunteers helped with search efforts. People hung yellow ribbons on trees and fence posts. Everyone hoped and prayed that somehow, somewhere, Dylan and Shasta were still alive. But as the days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Most missing children cases are solved within the first 48 hours. After that, the chances of finding them alive dropped significantly. By the time a month had passed, many people feared the worst. While the search for Dylan and Shasta continued, investigators were working hard to identify the person responsible. They carefully examined the crime scene, looking for any clues that might lead them to the killer. What they didn't know was that the man who had destroyed this family was already on the run, and he had the children with him. The person responsible was Joseph Edward Duncan III, a 42-year-old registered offender with a long history of violence against children. Duncan had been born in North Carolina in 1963 and had been committing crimes since he was a teenager. His first known offense happened when he was just 15 years old. In 1978, he attacked a 9-year-old boy. This wasn't just a one-time incident. It was the beginning of a pattern that would continue for decades. Duncan's childhood was troubled. He claimed he was mistreated as a child, though his family disputed this. His parents divorced when he was young, and he moved between different homes and schools. He never graduated from high school and struggled to keep jobs. As an adult, Duncan's crimes became more frequent and more serious. He was arrested multiple times for various violent crimes. He spent years in prison, but each time he was released, he would commit more crimes. In 1980, while in juvenile detention, Duncan told a therapist that he had harmed at least 6 boys. He estimated that by the time he turned 16, he'd harmed as many as 13 younger boys. The warning signs were there, but somehow, Duncan kept slipping through the cracks of the justice system. By 2005, Duncan was living in Minnesota and working odd jobs, but his violent tendencies hadn't gone away. In March of that year, he was arrested for hurting 2 young boys at a playground. This should have been the end of his criminal career. With his long history of violence, he should have been held in jail until his trial. But incredibly, the judge set bail at just $15,000. A local businessman who had befriended Duncan agreed to post the bail money. On April 5, 2005, Duncan walked out of jail a free man. He was supposed to stay in Minnesota and report to authorities regularly while awaiting trial. Instead, Duncan disappeared. He violated his bail conditions and became a fugitive. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but by then, it was too late. Duncan had already begun planning his next crime. He'd been driving around the Pacific Northwest, looking for potential victims. When he saw the Groene family's home by the lake, he decided they would be his targets. On the night of May 15, 2005, Duncan put his plan into action. He had been watching the family for days, learning their routines and waiting for the right moment to strike. According to Shasta's later testimony, she and Dylan were sleeping in their bedroom when their mother came rushing in. Brenda woke them up and whispered urgently, "Someone is in the house." The children followed their mother into the living room, where they saw Duncan for the first time. He was wearing dark clothes and black gloves, and he was holding a weapon. He didn't look wild or angry. He looked calm and in control, like he had planned this all along. Duncan used zip ties to bind the hands of Brenda, her boyfriend Mark, and 13-year-old Slade. Then he forced little Shasta and Dylan to sit outside on the front lawn while he went back into the house. From outside, the children could hear horrible sounds coming from inside. Loud thuds and crashes that told them something terrible was happening. Then Slade, bloody and badly hurt, stumbled out the front door as if trying to escape. But Duncan caught him and dragged him back inside. Duncan violently ended the lives of all 3 victims with a hammer. The violence was so extreme that it was clear he felt no mercy or remorse. When he was finished, he put Shasta and Dylan in a stolen red Jeep Cherokee and drove away into the night. What happened next was a 6-week nightmare that no child should ever have to endure. Duncan drove the children to remote campsites in the wilderness, far from any help or chance of escape. During this time, Duncan repeatedly hurt and mistreated both children. He made no attempt to hide what he had done to their family. In fact, he bragged about it. He told Shasta coldly that he had beaten her mother, brother, and Mark to death with a hammer. The children lived in constant fear, never knowing what Duncan might do next. They were completely at the mercy of a man who had already proven he was capable of unspeakable violence. The worst moment came several weeks into their captivity. According to Shasta's testimony, Duncan claimed that his weapon went off accidentally while he was looking for beer in his vehicle. Dylan was hit in the stomach and fell to the ground, screaming and begging for help. But what happened next wasn't an accident at all. As Dylan lay on the ground, wounded and terrified, Duncan picked up the weapon and pointed it at the boy's head. He pulled the trigger, but the weapon jammed. Dylan, despite his injuries, begged Duncan not to hurt him. Duncan reloaded the weapon and aimed again. This time, it fired. Dylan, just 9 years old, was gone. Shasta was now completely alone with her family's killer. She had watched him take the lives of her mother, her brother Slade, Mark, and now Dylan. She was the only one left. A few days later, Duncan gave Shasta a horrifying choice.
He was like, how do you want to die? And he was like, just like, you have the choice to be strangled or you have the choice to be shot like your brother, and that one's gonna be quicker. Like, you won't feel pain.
He asked her if she wanted to die, and if so, how? By strangulation or by weapon? Shasta, thinking quickly, chose strangulation, hoping it might give her more time to figure out how to escape. Duncan wrapped a rope around her neck and began to pull. But just as she was losing consciousness, Shasta managed to gasp out Jet, a nickname she had started calling him during their captivity. For some reason, that one word made him stop. He loosened the rope and asked her an unexpected question. "Do you want to meet my mom?" Shasta, desperate to survive, said yes. This decision would save her life. Duncan's decision to take Shasta to meet his mother led them back to civilization. They drove back to Coeur d'Alene, where Duncan's mother lived. But first, they stopped at a Denny's restaurant for breakfast. It was about 2 a.m. on July 2nd, 2005, when Duncan and Shasta walked into the restaurant. To most people, they just looked like a tired man and a sleepy child. But one waitress took a closer look. The waitress had been following the story of the missing children in the news. She had seen the posters and the television reports. When she looked at the little girl sitting with the disheveled man, something clicked. Moving quickly but quietly, she grabbed a newspaper that had photos of the missing children. She compared the pictures to the girl in the restaurant. It was definitely her. This was Shasta Groene. The waitress discreetly told her manager, who immediately called the police.
Can you describe the male to me? I'd say 6'3". Okay. Really slim. Okay. Dark hair? Yeah, curly. Curly. All right, we'll have someone said that way.
Other customers who had also recognized Shasta positioned themselves near the exits to make sure Duncan couldn't escape. Within minutes, police arrived at the restaurant. They arrested Duncan without incident. He didn't resist or try to run. He just sat there as officers handcuffed him and read him his rights. Shasta was immediately taken to the hospital for medical treatment. She was thin and pale, but incredibly, she was alive. After 47 days of unimaginable horror, she was finally safe. Duncan's arrest triggered a massive investigation. The FBI worked with local police to piece together everything that had happened during those 6 weeks. They searched the campsites where Duncan had held the children. They recovered evidence and tried to locate Dylan's body. Shasta, despite everything she had been through, was incredibly brave. She told investigators exactly what had happened, helping them understand the full scope of Duncan's crimes. Her testimony would be crucial in ensuring that Duncan faced justice for what he had done. The investigation also revealed that Duncan's crimes weren't limited to the Groene family. As police dug deeper into his background, they found connections to other unsolved cases across the country. Duncan's criminal history painted a picture of a man who had been dangerous for decades. Each time he was released from prison, he would disappear into society, only to strike again months or years later. In 1997, 10-year-old Anthony Martinez had been kidnapped and killed in California. For years, the case had been unsolved. But when investigators compared fingerprints from that crime scene to Duncan's, they found a match. Duncan eventually confessed to killing Anthony, saying it was his revenge against society. There were other cases too. Duncan admitted to killing 2 sisters in Seattle in 1996, Samijo White and Carmen Cubius. The girls, ages 11 and 9, had been walking home from school when they disappeared. Their bodies had been found nearly 2 years later, but until Duncan's confession, no one knew who was responsible. Duncan's own writings, found in his personal belongings, revealed the mind of a predator. He had kept detailed journals describing his thoughts about harming children. These writings showed that his crimes were not impulsive acts, but carefully planned attacks. Duncan faced multiple trials in different states for his various crimes. The legal process was complex and took several years to complete. In Idaho, he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree taking of life for ending the lives of Brenda, Slade, and Mark, plus kidnapping charges. Initially, Duncan planned to fight the charges, but eventually, he pleaded guilty to avoid putting Shasta through the trauma of testifying in court. The federal government also charged Duncan with crimes related to Dylan's death and the mistreatment of both children. These charges carried the possibility of the death penalty. In a surprising move, Duncan fired his lawyers and decided to represent himself during the penalty phase of his federal trial. After a psychiatric evaluation confirmed he was mentally competent, the court allowed him to proceed. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning their verdict: death. Duncan was sentenced to die for his crimes against the Groene family. Duncan spent his remaining years on federal death row in Indiana. He filed no appeals and seemed to accept his fate. In 2020, he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer. He refused treatment and died in his prison cell on March 28, 2021, at the age of 58. The Groene family tragedy had a lasting impact on the community and on laws designed to protect children. Many people questioned how someone with Duncan's violent history had been allowed to post bail and disappear. The case led to discussions about bail reform and better monitoring of registered offenders. It also highlighted the importance of the Amber Alert system, which had helped keep Shasta's case in the public eye. For Shasta, the road to recovery was long and difficult. She had survived something that no child should ever have to endure. But she showed incredible strength and resilience as she worked to rebuild her life. Steve Groene, who had lost 3 of his children and his ex-wife, became an advocate for victims' rights. He spoke publicly about the need for better protection of children and tougher sentences for repeat offenders. The case also had an impact on law enforcement training. The way the Denny's staff and customers handled the situation, recognizing Shasta, alerting authorities, and preventing Duncan's escape, became a model for how civilians should respond in similar situations. The Amber Alert system also received renewed attention after Shasta's rescue. The system had kept Shasta's case in the public eye for weeks. Without those constant reminders, the Denny's waitress might not have recognized her. Child safety advocates used the case to push for better protection laws. They argued that people with Duncan's history should never be allowed to post bail. The case also highlighted the need for better mental health services in the prison system. The Joseph Duncan case remains one of the most disturbing crimes in modern American history. It shows how a single person's evil actions can destroy multiple families and traumatize an entire community. But it also shows the power of human resilience and the importance of never giving up hope. Shasta Groene's survival and recovery demonstrate that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit can endure. The case raises important questions about our justice system and how we protect society's most vulnerable members. How many more dangerous people like Duncan are out there? slipping through the cracks, waiting for their chance to strike. Duncan had been flagged as a high-risk offender multiple times throughout his criminal career, yet somehow he had been allowed to post bail and disappear. The system that was supposed to protect society had failed. Legal experts began calling for reforms to the bail system. They argued that violent offenders with extensive criminal histories should be held without bail. The case also sparked debates about the death penalty and whether some individuals are simply too dangerous to ever be released. Throughout all of these debates, Steve Groene became a tireless advocate for victims' rights. He argued that his children's deaths could have been prevented if the warning signs had been taken seriously. Duncan's death in prison brought some closure to the case, but it couldn't undo the damage he had caused. The Groene family will never be whole again. Dylan will never grow up. But Shasta's survival ensures that her family's story will be remembered, and that their deaths weren't in vain. In the years following the tragedy, memorials were established to honor the victims. The community of Coeur d'Alene changed after the tragedy. People became more aware of the dangers that existed in their seemingly safe town, but they also showed their strength by supporting each other. The Denny's restaurant where Shasta was found has become an unlikely landmark. Staff members who were there that night are still recognized as heroes. For many people, the Groene case represents a turning point in how society thinks about violent crime and child safety. As we close this chapter on one of the darkest crimes in recent memory, we're reminded that evil exists in this world. But we're also reminded that good people, like the Denny's waitress who recognized Shasta, the customers who blocked the exits, and the investigators who worked tirelessly to solve the case, can make a difference. The fight between good and evil continues every day, and sometimes, thankfully, good wins. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think the justice system failed by allowing Duncan to post bail? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for listening.